Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we wander behind the velvet curtains and polished silver of Victorian England, where the real power never rested with the crowned heads or gilded names, but with the silent hands that made their lives sparkle. Not the hands of gods or kings, just servants. Flesh and bone, knuckles raw, backs bent, dreams smothered under soot and starch. You want comfort? This is not that story. This is the story of those who served, slept in cellars, and whispered behind cracked doors. And spoiler, they probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? I love knowing who's staying up with me across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. A girl, maybe 15, maybe younger. Nobody counted much once her mother died of fever and the parish packed her off to the big house. It looms 3 stories high, its chimneys already coughing smoke into the cold morning air. She's never seen a carpet before, never heard water run indoors like that, never been surrounded by this much quiet. Her name doesn't matter, not yet. To the butler, she's simply you. And to the housekeeper, she's the new Tweenie, because she's stuck between the scullery maid and the housemaid, between childhood and servitude, between invisibility and punishment. They put her in a lumpy cot under the basement stairs, not a bedroom, not even a room, just space enough for her knees to hit the wall when she curls on her side. But she's lucky. She's indoors, not in the workhouse, and she has food, well, crumbs, but it's more than some. There's a stiff apron and a grey dress waiting for her on a hook.
Don't wrinkle it, warns the kitchen maid, who has her own problems, chilblains, cracked knuckles, and a near-religious hatred of the footman who tracks soot across her clean floors. Their camaraderie is prickly, whispered. One moment they're stealing each other's bread, the next they're sharing a damp cigarette behind the coal chute. The Tweenie's first job? Fire duty. She learns the ritual fast. Up before dawn, down to the cellar, shovel coal, carry it up 3 flights, light fires in the drawing room and library before the master's shoes ever touch the carpet. No noise, no trace. The rooms must seem as if they simply woke up warm. The house runs like a ghost ship, quiet hands setting scenes before the audience ever enters. And she, the newest ghost, doesn't yet know the rooms by heart. She forgets to dust the piano leg, a cardinal sin. The housekeeper pinches her ear and hisses, "Do it again. We are not seen, we are felt."
Servants in Victorian England were expected to move like wind and vanish like smoke. The best ones didn't exist at all, until something went wrong. Most large homes operated under an unspoken code. The master is the sun, the lady his moon, and everyone else orbits in silence. For the youngest servants, their days start around 4:30 a.m., when most listeners are still dreaming, and end well past midnight. That's 18-hour days, 7 days a week. With luck, you get half a day off per month. With even more luck, you don't get fired for blinking too loudly. Historians estimate that by the 1850s, roughly 1 in 3 women under 30 in Britain was working in service. It was the largest single occupation for women at the time. But it wasn't just women. Boys were snapped up from orphanages, country parishes, or sent off by parents hoping their child would have a steady place. What the job offered was a contradiction, extreme stability, and extreme vulnerability. Once hired, servants lived at their place of work, often for years, sometimes decades. But that meant the job also owned their whole body, every hour, every breath. One fringe theory, that some of these great houses purposely hired illiterate servants, has found strange little bits of evidence. In some estates, books were locked away, reading was discouraged. A literate servant might read a diary, or a letter, or worse, write one. And if you thought your boss was paranoid today, imagine them in a corset with a household budget equal to a small country. In this home, the Tweenie is not allowed upstairs during the day. The lady dislikes dust, explains the under housemaid.
with a perfectly straight face, while handing her a rag. She's to practice moving silently on the back staircase, the narrow, twisting one hidden behind a door that looks like part of the wall. These staircases were designed precisely to keep the illusion of magic alive. Fireplaces warm themselves. Silver polishes itself. Dishes stack and vanish and reappear. And somewhere behind all that, a teenage girl is dragging her aching feet, dreaming about a crust of pie. The house has bells, dozens of them, each connected by string or wire to a small brass trigger upstairs. A dining room bell, a morning room bell, a master bedroom bell. When one rings, everyone stops. Who is it? What time is it? Whose job is it to answer? One curious detail, scholars still argue whether it was done for control or convenience, is the insistence on matching a bell to a single servant. The master's dressing room bell doesn't call a servant, it calls his servant. That way, if he's in a mood, the right person suffers. In many ways, the household is a mini-military. Rank matters, the butler and housekeeper are the generals, powerful, fearsome, not to be crossed. Below them, a rigid chain, cooks, footmen, maids, scullery girls, errand boys. The lower your rank, the dirtier the job, and the easier it is to replace you. One maid trips over a carpet and spills the morning tea tray. No one's hurt, but it's her second mistake this month. She's dismissed that night. No reference, no severance, no explanation needed. If you've ever had a job where you smiled through a boss's insult because rent was due, imagine that. Except if you lose the job, you also lose your bed, your meals, and your place in society. Oh, and remember, this is the best case. The servant in a rich home. The servants in smaller homes. They do all the same work with half the help. The maid of all work, yes, that was her actual title. Cleaned, cooked, washed, fetched, nursed, and in some cases buried her employer's relatives. As the tweenie learns to read the moods of the house, she also learns to read the clock, not in minutes, but in chores. 6 a.m. means ashes, 7 means boots, 9 means tea. Time becomes a carousel of labor, spinning and spinning no matter how dizzy she feels. Once, she forgets to shake out the master's newspaper. He says nothing, just frowns. Later, the butler finds her crying in the scullery. He hands her a cold potato and mutters, "You're still breathing. That's something. That's what passes for comfort here." And it's important to note, despite the crushing hardship, many servants weren't entirely miserable. Some took pride in the precision of their labor. Some bonded deeply with others below stairs, forming found families in their shared exhaustion. Gossip helped. So did dreams of marrying a butcher or sailing to Canada or someday becoming head housekeeper themselves. But for most, especially the newest, the story began the same way, with a quiet arrival, a scratchy uniform, and the creeping realization that no one would ever thank them for surviving. Because to the household, the servant must always remain part of the wallpaper. Or better yet, vanish entirely. The fire's already burning in the drawing room. That means the tweenie, our nameless girl, is doing something right. She tiptoes back down the servant's staircase, boots squeaking faintly despite her effort. She'll oil them later, if she can find a scrap of lard no one misses. Down in the scullery, the house is beginning to stir. Not with noise, of course, but with movement. Quiet, well-rehearsed, exhausting movement. The second housemaid is already shaking out rugs in the hall, beating them with a flat paddle like they've personally offended her. A footman is hauling in crates of milk bottles and muttering about the delivery boy being late again. The cook is clanging pans on purpose. That's her right. She's one of the few people in this house who can afford to be loud. Morning in a Victorian household doesn't really begin with sunshine. It begins with soot. The girl's hands are already black by 5 a.m. She's cleaned 5 fireplaces, and she hasn't eaten yet. Breakfast for the servants comes last, after the breakfast for the family is prepared and delivered. That's about 3 more hours from now. In theory, each servant has a wake-up time based on their rank and duties. In practice, it's more like the last moment they can possibly move without being scolded. For the tweenie, the cook has granted her a wake-up bell at 4:15. If she's up by 4, she's safe. If not, well, let's just say the master of the house doesn't take kindly to cold hearths. The last girl got a scolding so sharp it turned into an early dismissal. Some say she left in tears. Others say she left with a slice of jam tart in her pocket and a smile. The truth, as always, is somewhere between. Now picture this. The servants' hall is still dim. The gas lights haven't been turned up yet. The air smells of damp wool and singed toast. Someone's already boiling water, the kind that'll be used to fill a master's shaving basin. You can hear it hissing. You can feel the hush, the strange kind that exists only when people are together, moving in silence, trying not to disturb the beast upstairs. And by beast, we do mean the entire upstairs class. You see, Victorian servants had one primary directive. Don't be seen. If you're seen, it should only be in motion. Crossing a room with tea, adjusting a curtain, bowing slightly. Any appearance that lingers, that suggests presence, agency, existence. That's risky. It disrupts the illusion that the household simply runs itself. And so, mornings are a maze. A servant must maneuver through hallways, back staircases, narrow passages, all carefully timed to avoid running into a dressing mistress or waking a sleeping heir. The tweenie learns this rhythm quickly. She learns which floorboards creak and which bells are most likely to ring out of spite. The family's eldest daughter, for instance, has a habit of ringing for her maid whenever she misplaces her novel. It doesn't matter that the maid has just sat down to eat a dry scone for the first time in 7 hours. The bell rings and she must go. Some homes had dozens of these bells, mounted on wooden boards with delicate brass labels. Blue drawing room, east bedroom, morning room, breakfast parlour. Each bell has a wire behind it, snaking through walls and ceilings, like the house's nervous system. When one chimes, every servant's spine straightens. That bell could mean anything, from a broken cup to a broken leg to a lost glove or, most often, absolutely nothing at all. And if you think today's group chats are invasive, imagine living where your boss can summon you from any corner of the house, any moment of the day, just because they don't want to pour their own milk. One housemaid, a few years older than the tweenie, tries to make a game of it. "Guess the bell," she whispers between chores. "2 rings in a row?" That's the dressing room. The lady's annoyed about her sleeves again. But sometimes the bells ring in the middle of the night. Servants slept lightly for a reason. A sudden illness, a guest arriving late, a bedpan emergency. These things don't care about your rest. The cook might need hot broth at 2 a.m. Or worse, the master might have had too much port and wants help getting his boots off. The footman, eyes half closed, will stumble up 2 flights and keep his smile just tight enough to hide the rage. There's a reason many homes had the nursery positioned directly above the servants' quarters. Babies cry, nannies ring, and someone must always be listening. Now is a strange little tidbit. Some households placed a brass mat just outside the master's bedroom door. Why? Because it was rigged with a bell. Stepping on it, even lightly, would summon someone. A servant walking too near, too fast, could wake the entire floor. It's an odd, clever piece of control, masquerading as convenience. Like so many things in Victorian life. Even more curious, some homes enforced the shadow rule. Servants were expected to turn and face the wall when a member of the family walked past, so as not to offend with their gaze. Think of it, you're scrubbing the same floor where someone else just strutted through in silk slippers, and you're not even allowed to look up. By this point in her training, the The tweenie has learned that her face belongs to the shadows. Her hands, however, are everywhere. She helps wash the lady's petticoats, dozens of layers, soaked in lavender water and stiffened with starch so heavy it could double as armor. She sweeps crumbs from under carpets. Yes, under. The idea being the carpets might be lifted and checked. She even brushes the dog. No, not walks, not plays with, brushes.
The family spaniel has its own soft-bristled comb, which must be washed after each use and dried by the range. It also eats better than she does, but the servant's morning isn't all chores. There's breakfast too, eventually. Not the lavish affair upstairs, with eggs, kidneys, ham, and 3 kinds of bread. No, downstairs it's more humble. Porridge if you're lucky, stale bread with dripping if you're not. And yet, even this can't be eaten in peace. If a bell rings, you drop your fork. If the butler walks in, you stand up. And if the mistress decides to rearrange the parlour mid-bite, well, say goodbye to that crust of toast. Hunger is part of the uniform. Historians still debate how much real free time servants got. Some accounts suggest short breaks, 15 minutes maybe, to write a letter or darn a sock. Others argue these were mostly fiction, especially in households with fewer than 10 staff. The fewer people below stairs, the more hats each one had to wear.
But here's a rare silver lining. In some homes, servants could access second-hand newspapers, cast-offs from the library. That's how some learned to read. Others taught each other, whispering phonics between stair polishings. One even reportedly practiced writing using flour on a slate when ink was forbidden. There was always ingenuity, even in squalor. And speaking of squalor, there's the question of washing. A modern bath? Forget it. Servants washed in basins, cold water, shared soap. Privacy was minimal. Hygiene was practical, not pampered. One tale, possibly apocryphal but too delightful to skip, involves a maid who used the leftover lemon rinds from the mistress's tea to scrub her fingernails. Smells better than lye, she said. The day wears on. The tweenie, blinking from fatigue, hauls laundry into the courtyard. Her back aches, her arms sting, but she keeps moving. Because stopping is noticed, because stillness is dangerous, And because tonight, if she works hard enough, she might get a leftover biscuit from the tea tray. A biscuit that was too soft, or too dry, or too plain for the lady. It'll taste like survival. She's crouched on the second landing, one knee tucked beneath her apron, brushing lint from the velvet stair runner. Each stroke must be perfectly even. It's not about cleanliness, oh no. It's about the appearance of perfection. She must brush with the grain, not against it. And heaven help her if a single thread is left askew. Behind her, the butler's footsteps approach with the rhythm of a funeral march. He doesn't speak. He simply stands, watching, arms folded behind his back like a disappointed gargoyle. His shoes gleam with polish she applied earlier that morning. He's already checked the silver, twice. Now it's the runner's turn. "Your corners are sloppy," he says at last, voice so quiet it might as well be a breeze. Again. She suppresses a sigh and starts over. That's the rhythm of service in a Victorian household. Not tasks, not time. Correction, every chore has a hierarchy, every item an owner, and every servant a watcher. No one is truly alone. Even in silence, someone's evaluating. In this grand house, status flows downward like candle wax. The master commands the mistress commands the housekeeper commands the maids, and the maids, well, they take it all in silence. Rank rules everything below stairs. You'd think a group of workers all suffering together might become allies. But Victorian service is a social minefield, and hierarchy is its barbed wire. The butler, for example, is not just a glorified waiter. He's the top of the male servant ladder, often earning more than the cook, though not always, which led to many colourful turf wars in the servants' hall. He's the keeper of the wine cellar, the guardian of the silver, and the one who presents the soup at dinner with a gloved hand and a look of stern disinterest. He never runs, he glides. He's addressed as Mr. Smith, even by the other staff. The cook is his female counterpart, powerful, temperamental, often terrifying. She controls the pantry and the menus, and more importantly, she controls leftovers. Cross her, and you'll be tasting scorched toast for weeks. Below them are the footmen, tall, handsome, uniformed like soldiers in powdered wigs. Yes, some still wore them even into the 1850s. They're more decoration than labourers, but their duties are precise. Open doors, announce guests, serve meals. The higher their livery gleams, the more the household is admired. Some aristocrats even hired footmen purely for show, matched pairs, like living statues, paid more for height than skill. A strange, often overlooked fact, male servants were taxed. Yes, the government imposed a male servant tax on wealthy households to discourage unnecessary hiring. The upper class paid it gladly. Showing off their affluence through lavishly costumed staff was worth the cost. Meanwhile, at the very bottom of the pyramid, the scullery maid. She scrubs dishes, floors, pots, and occasionally her own bleeding fingers. She doesn't eat with the other servants. She barely sees daylight. The tweenie, hovering between scullery maid and housemaid, learns quickly that friendship with a scullery girl is both a kindness and a risk. Associate too low and you're looked down upon. But ignore her and you might find your aprons mysteriously mildewed in the laundry. Every role comes with its own unwritten rules. Housemaids don't walk through the front hall unless they're summoned. Footmen don't address the cook unless she speaks first. Undermaids don't sit at the servants' table until everyone ranked above them is served. And the butler? The butler floats. He is everywhere and nowhere, a silent authority in black wool and whiskers. Once the tweenie accidentally refers to him as Sir. He pauses mid-step, doesn't scold her, just stares until her ears burn.
Only gentlemen are called that.
He says finally, his tone like cooled lead.
And we are not gentlemen.
The line is clear. The butler may enforce the master's commands, may even mock them behind closed doors. But he never forgets that he, too, is a servant, just one with better cuffs and more keys. This dance of titles and roles governs every waking hour. It's not just about labour, it's about order, and when that order is disrupted, things get tense. One afternoon, the tweenie sees it happen. A visiting footman, on loan from a neighbouring estate, walks into the servants' hall and takes the wrong seat at dinner, the chair of the senior footman. Utter silence follows. It's just a chair, but also not just a chair. It represents authority, experience, rank. The senior footman smiles too politely, finishes his soup, and later that night accidentally bumps the visiting lad hard enough to send a tray of crystal crashing to the floor. The master upstairs grumbles about the cost, but doesn't suspect foul play. Below stairs, it's a warning. Respect the chain or be broken by it. There's another curious relic of this strict hierarchy. Servant uniforms. Not everyone wears them, but when they do, the symbolism is loud and clear. Footmen wear powdered wigs and tailored jackets with gold buttons, especially in aristocratic households. Their height, gloves, and even hair colour might be matched if the family is fashion-obsessed enough. They are, in a sense, living props, part of the house's decor. Housemaids wear black dresses with white aprons and caps. The cap's ruffles were sometimes used to signal rank. The more elaborate the lace, the higher the position. And the undermaids? Plain caps, starched but simple. The tweenie receives her first uniform after 3 months. It's second-hand, of course. Smells faintly of onions and bleach. But to her, it feels like a badge. Proof that she's survived this long. That she belongs. That she hasn't been dismissed, or broken, or sent back to the workhouse. But even the badge of a uniform comes with a hidden shackle. Uniforms render the servant invisible to the world outside the house. If she were to walk through town in her grey apron, she'd be seen as property, not an individual, not a girl, just a maid. Eyes would slide off her like she were wallpaper. Don't loiter outside in your uniform, the housekeeper warns. You'll bring shame. Shame, a word that surfaces often, especially from the higher ranks. The lady might say it about her cook being seen at the fishmonger. The cook might mutter it about the scullery maid's unbrushed hair. And the butler? He invokes it like a priest. The family's name must be protected, he says, polishing a wineglass until it sparkles like a lie. But the real reason for all this order, all this hierarchy, is fear. Fear of chaos. Fear that if the line between upstairs and downstairs blurs for even a moment, the entire illusion of class might crack. A maid glimpsed laughing too freely, a footman speaking without permission, a cook daring to contradict the master's wine pairing. These are tiny rebellions, and the household has mechanisms for stamping them out. Sometimes it's a warning. Sometimes it's a transfer. Sometimes it's a dismissal with no reference, which is a kind of social execution. Without a reference, you can't get another place. Without another place, you starve. Historians still debate how rigid these hierarchies truly were. Some letters from the time suggest warmth between upper and lower ranks, even affection. Others describe resentment, sabotage, and emotional brutality. It likely varied house to house. Some masters were kind, others were tyrants. Most, though, upheld the system, not with cruelty, but with apathy. And that apathy was perhaps the sharpest knife of all. Back in the scullery, the tweenie is scrubbing brass with a rag soaked in vinegar and flour. Her knuckles are red, her knees aching. She hums to herself quietly, an old song from her mother, barely remembered. The housekeeper appears in the doorway. "No noise," she snaps. "We're not in a tavern." The girl swallows her song. Not the words, just the sound. She tucks it away, somewhere deep inside, behind the layers of starch and dust. Hierarchy in the house doesn't end at chore lists or uniforms. It crawls into your mind, teaches you to edit yourself, to defer, to disappear, and the longer you stay, the easier it becomes. Not one to storo, however, most in the master, all these dispressions and the drug is of as being mind defers way. The dining room upstairs is a candlelit theatre. Gilded mirrors bounce light off polished silver, and the walls shimmer with damask wallpaper that probably costs more than a servant's yearly wage. It's 6 minutes before supper begins, and already the table has been set, the soup tureen warmed, and the wine decanted to precisely the right temperature. The footmen, stiff as statues, stand by the door, eyes forward. They've rehearsed tonight's service like a symphony. Downstairs, in the servants' hall, the scent of stale bread and boiled onion lingers. The tweenie sits on a 3-legged stool, scrubbing dried gravy off a chipped plate, fingers so numb she barely notices when she nicks her thumb on the edge. No one looks over. There's work to do. Dinner above is grandeur. Dinner below is discipline. When we imagine Victorian England, we picture heaping roasts and puddings, so tall they tremble. And that image is real, but only for the wealthy few, perched atop the food chain. Below stairs, the kitchen is a battlefield of labour, and meals for the staff are often an afterthought. Bread crusts, drippings, and yesterday's boiled vegetables, if you're lucky. The tweenie learns quickly, never eat first, never eat slow, and never expect butter. While the family dines in elegance, servants scramble to prepare, deliver, and recover. Meals are the climax of each day's labour, and supper most of all, 7 or more courses, each served with perfect timing, temperature, and grace. It's a ritual drenched in invisible sweat. That silver platter, hand-polished with a paste of vinegar and ashes just hours ago. That roast, basted by a scullery maid until her arm ached. The soup was stirred by the cook, tasted twice by the undercook, passed by the butler, and presented by a footman who's been fasting since noon to keep from fainting while holding it. Upstairs, they sip consommé. Downstairs, they dream of crumbs. This contrast wasn't incidental, it was by design. Victorian society relied on these gulfs of comfort to maintain control. The bigger the difference between what the family ate and what the servants didn't, the clearer the lines of power. It wasn't enough for the masters to feast. The staff had to witness it, smell it, serve it, and then return to their corner to eat whatever scraps remained. A particularly telling quirk: many servants were forbidden from eating certain upstairs foods unless specifically given permission. No sweets, no sauces, no cuts from the joint. And if a servant was caught stealing a slice of ham or a cube of jelly, immediate dismissal, no reference. But still, the temptation lingered. There's a famous case of a footman who was caught eating leftover syllabub out of a used glass. He claimed he was just cleaning it. The master laughed, then fired him. No letter, no pay, just a warning to the next in line. You are not part of the feast. Not that the food upstairs always lived up to its reputation. Yes, there were culinary marvels, stuffed pigeons, glazed hams, jellied fish. But there were also cold mutton breakfasts, overcooked cabbage, and dishes more beautiful than edible. One diary from the time recounts a guest who mistook a moulded blancmange centerpiece for a hat stand. He was only half wrong. And what of the people who made all this happen? Let's talk about the cook, a formidable figure. She reigns over the kitchen like Neptune over the sea, ladle in one hand, recipe in the other. Her moods attract like weather patterns. A happy cook means a peaceful day. A grumpy cook means scorched potatoes and sudden scoldings. The tweenies learned not to ask questions when the cook is slicing meat. Just nod, fetch the salt, and keep moving. The cook doesn't just make food, she plans it, balances the books, manages deliveries and negotiates with butchers who'd rather cheat her. Her status is such that she might even have her own bedroom, luxury of luxuries, but even she eats standing up, tasting stews off a spoon she never sets down. Beneath her, the kitchen maid prepares ingredients, peels potatoes, washes lettuce, grates horseradish, until her eyes burn. Below even her is the scullery maid who washes every dish, pot and pan used in the entire process. The scullery sink is an altar of grease and broken fingernails. On Sundays, if the housekeeper's in a good mood, the servants are allowed a pudding, treacle or suet. It's devoured in minutes and the tweenie often goes to bed thinking of it. Dense, warm, sticky sweet. It reminds her of childhood or maybe just of having a full stomach. Now here's a lesser-known curiosity. Some homes had a servant called a still-room maid. Her entire job, preparing preserves, jellies and herbal tonics in a room tucked away from the main kitchen. She was part alchemist, part herbalist, part ghost. Many of her remedies, cough syrups, stomach bitters, were passed down through generations. Historians still argue whether the still room existed more for medicine or for the mistress's vanity tonics. Either way, it was one of the few places a servant could be alone, if only briefly. For the tweenie, alone time is a dream. She's either working or waiting to work. Even meals are choreographed. Picture this. The servant's table is a long wooden bench, scarred from decades of elbows and knives. The butler sits at the head, the cook to his right, the footman next, then the maids by descending rank. The tweenie? Near the kitchen door, always ready to jump up if someone needs more water or a forgotten dish. When the meal begins, conversation is allowed, but only light, proper topics. Weather, deliveries, never complaints, never politics, never the family's private affairs, even though the servants know them better than anyone. Gossip happens, of course, but only in whispers over laundry or behind pantry doors. One night, the tweenie hears the second housemaid murmur, "They're fighting again." A pause. He spent too long in the conservatory. The others nod. No one says more. Servants were often the silent witnesses to family drama. Affairs, secrets, cruel punishments disguised as etiquette. But to speak of them was to risk everything. Another fringe tale passed between servants like folklore tells of a maid who overheard a scandal. Something about a forged signature and a misplaced will. She kept it secret for years, then used it to negotiate a better position in another house. Was it true? No one knows. But every servant dreams sometimes of having leverage. Back in the dining room, the family is finishing their 5th course, game pie in puff pastry. The tweenie in the butler's pantry is polishing forks for tomorrow. One slips from her hand. It clangs against the floor. She freezes. Footsteps. The butler appears, picks it up and hands it back. No words. Just a look. A reminder that even small noises carry meaning. Victorian meals weren't just about eating, they were performances. The table settings had rules. The number of forks, the fold of the napkin, the placement of the bread plate. A single mistake could cause embarrassment. And since the family would never admit they noticed, the punishment fell to the servant responsible. In fact, many households had dining manuals for guests and for servants. They outlined procedures in absurd detail. How to carve a partridge, when to present the cheese course, how to pass a wine bottle without touching the neck. These manuals weren't about practicality, they were about class. Knowing them was proof you belonged. And if you didn't, you were dismissed, or demoted, or sent to the scullery, where dignity went to die. The tweenie finishes her forks, checks her apron, and stands by the dumbwaiter. When the last dish is cleared, she'll carry it down. The roast bones will be boiled into stock. The pie scraps will become staff lunch tomorrow. The wine dregs might be saved if the cook's in a generous mood. Downstairs in the flickering gaslight, she finally gets her own meal. A slice of bread soaked in broth, a curl of cheese rind. It isn't much, but it's something, and tomorrow it begins again. The hallway smells like lavender polish and overcooked cabbage. The tweenie kneels beside the mahogany banister, cloth in one hand, tin of beeswax in the other. It's barely 6 in the morning, and her back already hums with pain. She hasn't had breakfast yet, not even tea, but the banister must gleam before the family begins to descend for their morning rituals. Rub, buff, rub, buff. She's memorized the cadence. Like a lullaby she never gets to sleep through. Today is deep clean day, though in truth, every day is some kind of cleaning day in this house. And it's not about actual dirt. It's about the idea of cleanliness. The Victorian obsession with order, hygiene, and propriety bleeds through every inch of their homes, and servants are the ones tasked with making that fantasy come true. The tweenie is too low-ranking to touch anything upstairs without permission. So today, her duties include staircase rails, cellar stairs, and the corridor by the servants' entrance. Tomorrow it might be chimney grates, or brass polish, or the worst job of all, chamber pots. She dreads chamber pot duty, not for the reasons you'd expect. It's not the smell, it's not the awkwardness of handling a grown man's porcelain urinal before she's even had her tea. It's the quiet humiliation. The way her presence is never acknowledged when she fetches it from under the bed. The way she has to move like smoke, eyes down, as though the waste itself has more dignity than she does. She empties the pots into a slop bucket, rinses them in a small wash basin tucked behind the scullery, and adds a few drops of vinegar to mask the smell. Once, she accidentally spilled a drop on her skirt, and the cook told her she smelled like a fishwife's apron. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Victorian homes, especially the grand ones, are essentially temples of maintenance. Every object has to gleam. Every piece of furniture has its own protocol. Chairs are dusted twice daily, floors polished with beeswax and elbow grease, and mirrors buffed until you can see your thoughts reflected in them. The housemaid handbook, yes, there were actual printed guides, spared no detail. One popular manual even suggested washing the leaves of indoor plants with tepid water and a soft rag. Not because it helped the plant, mind you, because dusty leaves were unsightly. Nature must be tidy or it is banished. The tweenie has memorized these details. Not because she's been taught, but because every missed speck earns her a scold, and every silent success earns her, well, nothing. No praise, no thank you. Just the absence of punishment, which in her world is about as close as she'll get to celebration. Today she helps polish the brass handles of the front door. It's a strange job. No one enters through that door except the family and their guests. Servants use the side or basement entrance, but the front door must sparkle. The family must never notice it, because that would mean it's failed to be flawlessly unnoticeable. She polishes in silence, while the footman watches from the hallway mirror, adjusting his collar. He doesn't speak to her. She wouldn't dare speak to him first. That's how it goes. Sometimes, when the cook isn't looking, she steals a glance into the drawing room, the forbidden zone. The carpets are thick enough to lose your footing. The wallpaper has birds painted in flight, frozen forever. There's a globe in the corner that spins just for show. It's the first time she's seen a globe. Her world is smaller. Broom closets, staircases, cellars. Scrubbing is a ritual. The floors must be washed on hands and knees, never with a mop, because mops miss corners, and corners are where disgrace hides. The marble in the vestibule, vinegar. The oak in the dining room, milk and lemon oil. The kitchen flagstones, lye and sand, and always in silence. The house should clean itself, as far as the family is concerned. There's one peculiar fact historians love to point out. Many Victorian homes required maids to dust the bottoms of tables and chairs. Why? Not because anyone looked under them, but because knowing it was clean gave the housekeeper peace of mind. In a world where appearances were everything, invisible labour was the gold standard. The tweenie once asked the second housemaid why she was polishing the underside of a drawer. Because the mistress says guests can always tell, she said straight-faced. They have a sense about these things. Does she believe that? Maybe, maybe not. But belief is optional. Obedience is not. Today, the tweenie is assigned to cleaning the back stairs, the narrow staircase used by staff to get between floors unnoticed. It's steep, twisty, and covered in worn carpet that catches soot like a magnet. She brings up the dustpan, the stiff brush, and the tin of lemon oil. She scrubs with a rhythm that matches her breath. Down, over, sweep, up, repeat. Halfway up, her knee gives a small twinge. She ignores it. Pain is background noise now. By late morning, she's soaked with sweat and covered in dust. She's summoned to help with the laundry. This is no delicate affair. Victorian laundry days were marathon events. Tubs of boiling water, bluing agents to whiten the linen, wooden paddles for beating clothes into submission. Bleach wasn't yet a common household item, so lye soap did the heavy lifting, and also the skin burning. Some families sent their laundry out, but many, especially proud households, preferred the control of doing it in-house. The tweenie stirs the sheets in hot water until her hands go numb. She can barely feel the rag in her fingers, but she keeps scrubbing. Laundry is where many servants catch illnesses. The damp, the fumes, the steam. It's a recipe for coughs and cracked skin. But there are no sick days. If you're lucky, the housekeeper lets you rest for an hour. If not, you collapse on your feet and hope someone drags you to the cot before you faint. One kitchen maid, the tweenie knows, once fell asleep standing during laundry duty. She was carrying a basket of wet linens and simply slumped forward into the sink. The butler called her dramatic and docked her wages. She was back the next day, red-eyed and trembling. Victorian cleaning isn't just intense, it's endless. By the time you finish one rotation of chores, the soot has returned, the silver has tarnished, the linen has wrinkled. It's like being trapped in a clock that resets every 12 hours. And no one claps when the floor shines. No one cheers when the sheets are crisp. The reward for a clean house is that you get to clean it again tomorrow. The tweenie is helping air out the drawing room when she accidentally knocks a vase. It doesn't fall. It doesn't even wobble, but the noise, ceramic tapping against wood, draws the housekeeper's eye. A single eyebrow lifts. Nothing is said, but that look will sit in the tweeny's stomach like spoiled milk all day. She works harder. She scrubs the tiles beneath the stove until her wrists ache. She fetches coal without being asked. She polishes the bell pulls. No one praises her. They never do. But at dinner, the kitchen maid slips her the heel of a loaf, still soft, not crusted over. A small act, a gesture that means, I saw, I know. This is how servants support each other. Quietly, without words. A bit of jam smuggled on a spoon, a cup of warm tea left by the stove, a blanket folded just right. The tweenie eats the bread slowly, savouring it. She doesn't cry. She's long past crying over kindness. But her shoulders soften, just for a minute. Historians often debate whether servants internalized their roles or resented them. Some say many believed service was honourable. Others argue they were simply trapped, too tired or too poor to consider rebellion. The truth is likely both. Some took pride in their shine. Others cursed every floorboard they scrubbed. Most, like our tweenie, lived in a grey area, enduring, adapting, surviving. The day ends with one final task, lighting the master's fire. It must be crackling by the time he retires, even if it's warm out. It's the illusion that matters. She kneels, arranges the kindling, and lights the match. The flame catches, flickers, grows. Shadows dance on the brass screen. For a moment, it's beautiful. She stays there a second too long, hands warm by the flicker. Then she stands, adjusts her apron, and disappears down the hallway. Tomorrow, the banisters will be dusty again, and she will be ready. The linen closet smells like starch and secret. The tweenie lingers near it, pretending to search for clean pillowcases, when in truth she's eavesdropping. Two housemaids whisper behind the pantry door, voices low and urgent. One has blotchy cheeks, the other hisses something about the footman and the wine cellar, and you must tell the housekeeper before someone else does. The tweenie slips away, pulse quickened, not from scandal, but from understanding. This house, like many Victorian homes, is laced with more than pipes and bell wires. It's wired with tension, sexual, social, and dangerous. Love, lust, and locked doors, an invisible undercurrent in the servant world. Servants lived in constant proximity, not just physically, but emotionally. They shared rooms, duties, sleep, stress, scraps of food, and scraps of dreams. And proximity breeds intimacy. It also breeds danger. Courtship in service was a tightrope walk. Fall the wrong way and you lost everything. Yet human hearts aren't known for following protocol, are they? The tweenie's not old enough to understand the full mechanics of desire, but she sees it in glances. The kitchen maid brushing her sleeve a bit too slowly when passing the second footman. The way he lingers in the scullery doorway on his way to the wine cellar, though he has no business there. In theory, romantic relationships between staff weren't forbidden. In practice, they were precarious. The house demanded absolute discretion. Anything more than a hint of impropriety could result in dismissal, particularly if the affair crossed rank lines or worse, resulted in pregnancy. Pregnancy, a word heavy as a chamber pot. The fear of it stalks every female servant past puberty. There are no protections, no privacy, no safety nets. If a maid is discovered to be in trouble, as they euphemistically put it, she is often dismissed on the spot, usually with her belongings tossed out after her. No reference, no sympathy, just silence. The father, if he's a fellow servant, he might be dismissed too. Or not. If he's a gentleman of the house, well, that's where things get slippery. Historians still argue whether the frequency of masters seducing or assaulting female staff was as high as Victorian fiction suggests. But first-hand accounts and household letters whisper plenty. Ladies' maids bearing children who died young, scullery maids sent away, and sudden staff turnovers that coincided with certain birthdays 9 months later. There are hints in the records. An unnamed maid fired for improper conduct, a baby left on a church step wearing a footman's livery ribbon, an entire family relocating abruptly after a misunderstanding with the nurse. The tweenie has seen the signs, the sudden hush when a maid emerges pale from the drawing room, the way the housekeeper won't meet her eyes for days afterward. And there are locked doors. Always locked doors. The lady's jewellery cabinet, the butler's wine cellar, the master's study, but also the back stairs at night, when one footman lingers too long and one chambermaid can't find her way out. A door creaks. A hand silences a gasp. And in the morning, everything is tidy again, except her. Female servants lived with the daily knowledge that they could be ruined in a heartbeat, without proof, without trial and without recourse. Respectability was as fragile as a teacup. Once cracked, it was useless. And yet, people still fell in love. Some couples met in service and, after years of saving, married and opened boarding houses or bakeries. Some wrote letters in secret, delivered under trays or between linen folds. There are even records of servants holding mock weddings on rare days off, just for a taste of what they couldn't yet afford. One fringe story, a favourite among ageing housekeepers, tells of a kitchen maid and a footman who eloped to Brighton with stolen silver and lived as Sir and Lady for 3 glorious months before being caught. They returned in disgrace, but with such style that the butler secretly tipped his hat as they passed. Whether true or not, the story reveals a truth. Servants may have been denied proper romance, but they were not denied longing. The tweenie catches glimpses of it sometimes. Folded notes, shared smiles, flushed cheeks when someone drops a teacup and hands touch. These moments aren't just about lust. They're about connection in a world built to keep them invisible. But not all love stories are mutual. There's the tale of a head footman who courted a housemaid with chocolates and pressed flowers, only to learn she fancied the grocer's assistant instead. He broke a plate and nearly lost his position. His pride couldn't take it. Heartbreak, it turns out, doesn't care about social rank. And worse still are the stories with darker turns. When power intersects with privacy, abuse often hides in plain sight. The master who calls the housemaid to his study late at night,
The young governess told to earn her keep in ways not listed in her contract. The lady who dismisses a girl, not because of what she's done, but because of what her husband might do. There's no HR department here, no complaints form. Just whisper networks, kitchen gossip, and silent acts of rebellion. One such rebellion comes in the form of footfall. When the master passes too close to the tweenie in the hallway one morning, she stiffens. He doesn't touch her, doesn't even look at her, but she hears the hush that falls among the other servants afterward. A hush that says, "We saw that, be careful." Later, the kitchen maid gives her a scarf against the chill. It's not cold. This too is how servants protect each other, through coded gifts, unspoken warnings, and strategically altered chore lists. The housekeeper reassigns the tweenie to the laundry for a week. No explanation. Protection, in this world, is delicate and imprecise, but it exists. And what about love upstairs? Occasionally, a master falls in love with a servant. Truly, madly, absurdly, these stories are rare and usually disastrous. One baronet proposed to his housemaid and was disowned by his family. Another married his cook and was shunned in polite society. It rarely ended well. Still, the idea captivated imaginations, fueling penny novels, gossip columns, and more than a few servants' daydreams. Could it happen? Maybe. Would it matter? Probably not, because even love had a class. The tweenie knows she's not supposed to think about these things. She's supposed to focus on her work, folding towels, airing beds, scrubbing linoleum until it gleams. But she's human. She dreams of laughter, of music, of holding hands without permission.
And sometimes, on her rare half-day off, she walks past the flower seller near the square. She never buys anything, but she watches the young man behind the cart, his sleeves rolled up, his smile easy. He never looks at her. That's okay. She doesn't need him to. She just likes knowing the world still has colour. One of the great ironies of Victorian service was how intensely private lives became, while being lived entirely in public.
汤景曰：杜诗人我事後，對腰聰明的一百步。
You shared bedrooms, bathrooms, even petticoats. You overheard quarrels, saw nakedness, sometimes literal, sometimes emotional, and memorized the shape of another's sigh.
地界一百步，前去一百步發慢的。
Yet you could go years without anyone truly knowing you. Romance in this world becomes both a luxury and a risk.
第四，不地就着明，睡一百步睡得方慢。
A whispered rebellion against the sterile rhythm of bells and starch.
就剩美一百步發慢。
And when it burns too hot, well, the house has a solution for that too. Dismissal. Silence. Replacement. The lady hires a new housemaid. The butler trains a new footman. The bed is remade. The uniforms folded. The clock resets.
我之赖，客不多，是经营团。
But behind the pantry door, someone still remembers the girl who laughed too loudly, or the boy who whistled while polishing boots. Maybe on some quiet night, another hand reaches out in the dark not out of lust, but loneliness. Not every love story needs a happy ending. Sometimes it just needs someone to notice it happened. The dining room is empty now. Silver glints dully in the twilight, and the long velvet curtains rustle faintly from the draught snaking beneath the floorboards. Upstairs, the family has retired to the drawing room, nursing sherry and complaints. Downstairs, in the butler's pantry, the tweenie crouches beside a tray of soup-stained spoons, hands trembling from exhaustion. She's not trembling just from work today. She's trembling from what happened an hour ago, when the master of the house brushed past her too closely in the hallway. It was nothing, officially. No touch, no words. Just the way his gaze lingered one beat too long. The way his shadow clung to the floorboards even after he was gone. It's not the first time she's seen that look. It's the way one watches a glass figurine and wonders how easily it might break. Upstairs monsters, downstairs masks. For all their poise and polish, Victorian households housed predators, saints, hypocrites, and martyrs, sometimes all in the same corseted frame. To the outside world, the family appeared refined and noble. But behind closed doors, the power dynamics twisted like hot tallow. The tweenie's been warned already, by glances, by the sudden reassignment of evening duties, by a kitchen maid who once said, softly, "If he ever calls for you alone, go slow. Let someone see you go." This kind of whisper isn't in the manuals. It's passed hand to hand, like secret maps to survival. Let's talk plainly. Victorian households were not safe places, not for servants, and certainly not for the youngest and most vulnerable among them. Masters of the house had near absolute authority over their staff. The law offered little recourse, especially for women. And the house itself, massive, quiet, full of locked rooms, became a stage for domination disguised as tradition. Some historians believe that this was the inevitable result of a structure that placed unchecked power into private hands. Others argue that many masters were kind, paternalistic, even protective. The truth is frustratingly complex. For every kind employer, there was another who treated their staff as something just above livestock. And for the servants, especially the lower-ranked women, every encounter held calculations. Is this safe? Is this routine? Is this how it starts? The tweenie's already mastered the art of shrinking, of timing her steps so she's always leaving a room when someone else enters. of looking down just long enough to seem invisible but not insolent. She's not alone. Every servant wears a mask. The butler wears quiet authority. The cook wears temper like armor. The footman wears charm stitched into every button. And the housemaids? They wear pleasantry, a kind of subdued cheerfulness that says all is well, even when all isn't. Take the lady of the house, for example. She's not a monster in the obvious sense. She doesn't scream, she doesn't strike, but she knows how to wound. A maid forgets to starch a lace collar. The lady remarks, gently, that it's such a shame how some girls never quite grasp refinement. The girl's cheeks burn. She doesn't forget again. This is Victorian cruelty, polished, indirect, and devastating. The lady keeps a book of servant notes. Every mistake is documented in ink. Spilled tea, noted. Uneven dusting, noted. The list is reviewed monthly, and those with too many entries disappear. No fanfare, just a cold morning, a trunk by the back door, and the door closed behind them. The lady once dismissed a maid for sneezing in the drawing room. The girl had tried to stifle it, but failed. The lady simply said, "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a home where discretion is not required." By evening, she was gone. The master's cruelty is different, quieter but sharper. He expects his brandy at precisely 9 p.m., warm but not hot. He never thanks the footman who brings it. He does, however, raise an eyebrow if the footman's hair is too long, his gloves too wrinkled. Once, when the soup was late by 4 minutes, he merely said, "This house is beginning to slip." The butler lost sleep for a week. Punishment in this world rarely comes as yelling. It comes as silence, as notes in ledgers, as rearranged schedules that quietly demote or isolate. A maid whose name disappears from the breakfast rota knows she's being watched. A footman reassigned to the stables understands he's being punished. One particularly haunting story involves a young nursemaid who dropped a porcelain bowl while preparing a child's bath. It cracked only slightly. The master never said a word, but within 3 days, she was reassigned to the laundry and never allowed near the children again. She cried every day for a week. Then she stopped. That's how the house molds you. The tweenie watches, learns, adapts. She doesn't speak unless spoken to. She doesn't volunteer opinions, and she definitely doesn't linger near the master's study, even when sent for. Yet there are moments when the mask slips. One afternoon, the housekeeper catches the butler laughing with the coachman over a limerick. Her face freezes. "We maintain dignity," she says flatly, "or we become them." It's an ironic statement. The servants spend every waking moment upholding the image of the family's superiority. But to reveal too much personality is to risk being cast out for forgetting one's place. Still, the cracks show. The second footman hums tunes from the music hall when he thinks no one hears. The cook mutters French curses under her breath when the lady sends back the soufflé for being too yellow. The tweenie keeps a small scrap of blue ribbon tucked in her apron pocket, her only treasure from home. These are the little rebellions, the ways they hold on to themselves. Now here's a curious tidbit. In some rare cases, servants deliberately mocked the family. In private, of course. Impersonations, whispered impressions, even secret nicknames. One household's master was known as Sir Sniff because of his constant nasal whistling. Another lady was dubbed Queen of Custard for her inexplicable obsession with dessert. But such mockery was always shared in whispers. Never aloud, never in writing. Because the walls have ears. Some great houses were even rumoured to have hired spies, other servants tasked with reporting disloyalty. Whether true or not, the fear was real enough to keep most mouths shut. The tweenie once overheard a maid mutter, "The housekeeper's as dry as overcooked parsnip." She didn't laugh. She just walked faster, She's learning. The house may look like a museum, but it breathes like a predator. It notices who smiles too much, who arrives late, who speaks with too much cheer, and it punishes accordingly. One of the upstairs guests, a visiting cousin, tries to chat with the tweenie while she dusts the banister. He asks her name. She stammers, flushes. The butler appears within moments. She's not for conversation, he says. She's for cleaning. The cousin laughs awkwardly. Of course, just being friendly. But friendliness in this house is treacherous. To be noticed is to be vulnerable. To be liked is to be envied. To be special is to be hunted. So the servants learn to blend. They wear their masks with precision. The cook is fierce but loyal. The footman is smooth but silent. The tweenie is small, quiet, and forgettable. And that's the point. It's not that monsters walk these halls every night. It's that the house itself, its rules, its roles, its silence creates them. And downstairs, the masks stay on until sleep, if it comes. She coughs into her sleeve quickly, quietly. The laundry steam has been heavy this morning, too much lye, not enough air, and now her chest burns with every breath. She straightens from the basin, back stiff, and looks around the scullery. No one notices. No one ever really does. That's the rule. Illness is not part of the job. You're allowed to scrub, carry, polish, kneel, and obey. But you're not allowed to falter. And certainly not to fail. A sick day is a death sentence. Victorian service doesn't come with sick leave. If you're too weak to lift the coal bucket, someone else must carry it, and they will resent you for it. If you faint while setting the table, the master will raise an eyebrow. The housekeeper will raise her pen. That's all it takes. A single entry in the servant ledger. Unreliable. One of the most sobering truths about life below stairs is that your health belongs to the household, not to you. The tweenie wakes up each morning with a sore throat now. Just a tickle, but it's been lingering. She knows better than to mention it. Instead, she chews mint leaves when she can find them, drinks hot water with a pinch of salt, and avoids the housekeeper's eye when she's red-faced from coughing. There's no doctor for her, not unless it gets bad enough to alarm the lady, and that's unlikely. Most servants doctor themselves, or rely on the still room-maid if there is one. A girl with bottles of elderflower cordial, pennyroyal tonic, and something labelled Dr. Hemsley's lung elixir that smells like regret and turpentine. Home remedies are passed between staff like recipes. Onion syrup for coughs, horseradish compresses for fever. One housemaid swears by rubbing goose fat on her chest and wrapping herself in flannel. The tweenie tries it once. It's as disgusting as it sounds, but she sleeps through the night. Still, the next morning, her hands shake as she polishes the stair rail. She hopes no one notices. She prays no one notices. The brutal irony? The house is a breeding ground for illness. Coal dust, damp cellars, shared bedding, exhaustion. Every element conspires against health, and yet, sickness is seen not as a consequence of the job, but as a personal failing. Take the case of Elsie, the kitchen maid before her. 1 week she was everywhere, hauling pots, kneading dough, always humming. The next she was coughing so violently she couldn't hold a ladle. The cook gave her a spoonful of vinegar and sent her back to the ovens. By the end of the month she was gone. No one said where. No one asked. One mainstream historical fact, tuberculosis, then called consumption, was rampant among domestic workers. It thrived in cold, damp conditions and in people who were overworked and underfed. Which is to say, servants. An 1857 study found domestic servants made up a disproportionate number of urban TB deaths, especially women under 30. But TB wasn't the only threat. There were boils, infections, chilblains that turned to ulcers. There was influenza, diphtheria, even typhoid in homes with poor sanitation. Servants were the first line of exposure, handling laundry, emptying privies, cleaning up after sick guests. And yet, if they showed symptoms, dismissal, quiet, swift, merciless. The tweenie knows this in her bones, literally. Her knees ache constantly now, especially after hours on the stone floors. She's not even sure they'll grow right. She hears clicking in her shoulder.
There's a strange, raw patch on her palm that won't heal. She rubs vinegar on it because the scullery maid said it would help. It doesn't. It just stings. She's careful to smile at mealtimes, careful to bend with ease, even when her back screams. She carries the laundry basket on her good side.
She learns to mask pain the same way she masks dust, with polish and silence. One lesser-known tidbit: some upper-class families provided tonics to their staff, not out of kindness, but because they feared infection. It wasn't compassion, it was self-preservation. A servant's death disrupted the house. A servant's cough was bad form. So some families stocked patent medicines and expected staff to dose themselves like clockwork. Most of these medicines were alcohol-laced syrups, barely more effective than brandy and hope. The lady once left out a bottle of tonic labelled Mrs. Winlow's Soothing Syrup. The tweenie read the back label while dusting. It included morphine, alcohol, and chloroform. For mild discomfort. No wonder the butler takes a spoonful every night before bed. There's another threat, more silent than illness. One the tweenie has only just begun to understand. Uselessness. If you're sick, you can be replaced. If you're slow, you can be replaced. If you limp, cough, or faint in the hallway, you can be replaced. Old servants know this fear intimately. The laundress who hums to herself while ironing has done this for 30 years. Her hands shake now. She burns fabric more often. But she smiles and says nothing. She can't afford to stop. She has no savings, no family. There's no pension in service. Once you can't work, you become a burden, and burdens don't last long in grand houses. The tweenie remembers what the housekeeper said when the last scullery maid fell down the back stairs. A shame, really. I liked her. But knees don't mend proper at her age. She was 16. She never came back. At the end of the day, the tweenie sits by the stove with her ragged apron still on. The cook tosses her a heel of bread, softer than usual. "You look peaky," she says. "I'm fine," the girl lies. The cook doesn't push. She knows the truth, but there's nothing to be done. No time, no relief, just bread and darkness, and the promise of more labour tomorrow. Historians continue to debate how much upper-class families knew about the suffering of their servants. Some clearly didn't care. Others likely turned a blind eye, or convinced themselves that discipline bred virtue. A few families were genuinely concerned, but concern didn't change the structure. A day off, a fruit basket, a pat on the head, these gestures were drops of kindness in an ocean of expectation. The tweenie sometimes dreams of being noticed, but not for her work, not for her polish, just as herself, as a girl who aches and coughs and once wanted to be a seamstress. She wraps herself in her old wool shawl that smells of starch and sleep. Tomorrow will come, and she'll rise again before the sun. She'll cough into her sleeve, quietly, and no one will notice, because the house doesn't stop, and neither can she. The pantry shelves are nearly bare again. There's half a wheel of cheddar sealed in muslin, a small bag of flour riddled with weevils, and a jar of pickled onions so old it might predate the tweenie herself. She closes the door carefully. The cook doesn't like it slammed. It upsets the vinegar bottles. They're behind again, and not just on food, wages too. The tweenie doesn't get paid regularly. Technically, she earns a few shillings a month, but the lady holds it for her, deducting room and board, cleaning costs, uniform wear, breakages, and on one occasion, a teaspoon she didn't even touch. What she actually receives, when she receives it, is barely enough for a ribbon at the draper's, or a scrap of gingerbread on a rare afternoon off. It's the same for the others. The footman pretends to be flush, but everyone knows he's been borrowing from the boot boy. The second housemaid quietly mends gloves for the coachman on Sundays, for a farthing each. The cook barters kitchen scraps with the grocer's boy for bruised apples. Everyone smiles. Everyone says nothing. Because the brutal reality is this: In Victorian England, even servants who had steady work teetered on the edge of financial collapse. The butcher, the baker, the debt maker, all familiar figures. Some shops offer credit to long-standing households, but the ledger comes due eventually. And servants, despite their proximity to wealth, have none of their own. Everything they touch belongs to someone else. It's a strange irony. They carry candlesticks worth more than a year's wages. They polish silver they'll never eat from. They serve cakes they can't afford the crumbs of. And then, on their day off, if they get one, they pass shop windows with the same items behind glass, priced far beyond reach. Some servants are allowed to keep small tips. If a guest is generous or distracted, a coin might be left on a tray. Technically, it belongs to the household. Unofficially, it goes into a pocket, quickly and quietly. But tips are rare, and not everyone gets the chance. The tweenie, lowest in the chain, is unlikely to see one for years, so she learns the economy of service, a barter system built on crumbs, kindness, and careful thievery. Yes, thievery, not the grand heist of penny dreadfuls, just survival. A strip of bacon tucked into a skirt pocket, a crumbling heel of bread saved from the bin, an extra lump of sugar sneaked from the tea caddy and dissolved in a tin cup behind the laundry. It's not malice, it's hunger. And most experienced servants know where the line is. Don't touch anything the lady will notice. Don't take more than you can eat in a single bite. Don't, under any circumstances, steal silver. One story, told in the scullery, involves a parlour maid who lifted a pair of gloves from the mistress's drawer. Just gloves. She wore them once, to the market. A neighbour recognised them. She was arrested. The lady insisted on pressing charges. "We must set an example," she said. The girl spent 3 months in prison. When she came out, no one would hire her. That's how fast the ground can vanish beneath you. The tweenie watches closely. She sees how the kitchen maid wraps leftovers in linen and forgets to carry them to the larder. How the coachman sells extra hay to the greengrocer in exchange for carrots. How the butler trades empty bottles of sherry, emptied by him, for favours at the wine merchants. This is a world of side hustles, long before the phrase existed. In fact, one fringe fact? Some servants use their time in service to learn trades, illegally. A housemaid might watch the dressmaker closely, memorising the stitches. A footman might study the cook's books, copying recipes into a hidden ledger. There are even tales of scullery maids who became successful bakers using stolen techniques and, in one case, a stolen oven tray. But these stories are rare. Most servants don't climb, they cling. They cling to pennies, to old boots, to cracked mugs they're technically not allowed to own. They cling to dried flowers pressed in books, or scraps of ribbon from an old mistress's dress, or a single letter from home folded into softness. The tweenie has one of those letters. It's barely legible. Her cousin wrote it months ago, telling her that the chickens died, but the pig is thriving. She keeps it in her apron, rereading it when she feels especially invisible. Wages, when they do arrive, come in coins wrapped in paper. Always underpaid, often late. Some households pay quarterly, others when convenient. There's no consistency, no contract, just tradition and deductions. Break a plate? That's 2 pence. Spill wine? 6 pence. Lose your apron button? Replace it from your own meagre stash. The house provides nothing for free, and everything is your fault. One servant joked once, "I owe this place more than it owes me." No one laughed. And then there are the money traps. The expenses required just to keep the job. Shoes must be polished, uniforms repaired, hair neat. These things cost money. You can't show up for work with holes in your stockings, even if you scrub 20 fireplaces a week. Appearances must be maintained, even if it means skipping a meal to buy thread. The tweenie has worn the same petticoat for a year. She sews new seams into old fabric with stolen needles. She once traded a length of ribbon for a spool of thread. It's a form of currency now. There's another insidious part to this.
Many employers expect gratitude for providing room and board. The idea is that servants should be thankful. After all, they have a roof, food, barley, and work. What more could they want? So when a servant complains, it's seen as betrayal, but gratitude doesn't fill an empty stomach. And poverty doesn't excuse absence. One morning, the footman is late, just 5 minutes. He'd been walking the long way from the bakery to avoid a debt collector, one who threatened to tell the master. The butler scolds him in front of everyone, not for being late, for being known to owe money. "You shame the household," he says, as if the household isn't shaming them all. Some upper-class families claim to treat their servants like family, but no family demands silence, obedience, and 7 days a week for a wage that doesn't buy a winter coat. Some masters loan their servants money. It sounds generous. It's not. It turns the employer into a creditor, doubling the power imbalance. A servant in debt to their master can't leave, can't argue, can't breathe. The tweenie knows a housemaid in the next street who borrowed a crown from her mistress after her father died. She's been repaying it for 18 months. She still owes a shilling. That's why some servants hide their earnings, hoarding them in tin boxes behind firewood piles or buried in the garden under the gooseberry bush. One footman supposedly kept his entire savings sewn into his coat lining. He died of pneumonia. The coat was never found. The tweenie doesn't save yet. There's nothing to save. But she dreams of it, a box, a key, a few coins scraped together, until one day she can leave, open a small tea shop, and never scrub a chamber pot again. Until then, she borrows sugar from the kitchen maid and pays her back in boot polish. She swaps her mending skills for help carrying coal. She keeps her eyes open at the market for bruised apples and once stole a potato left on the cart. It's not glamorous. It's not Dickensian mischief. It's survival. And when the bread runs out and the cheese goes mouldy, she doesn't complain. She tightens her apron, hides the hunger, and fetches the polish. The banisters aren't going to shine themselves. The hallway is dark, save for the sliver of moonlight leaking in through the narrow servant's window. The tweenie tiptoes barefoot, careful not to creak the floorboards. Her shift brushes softly against her legs, still damp from the late shift at the laundry. In one hand, she carries a single candle stub, in the other, nothing. Her other hand is for balance, for silence, for escape. She isn't supposed to be here, not after hours, not barefoot, not with her hair unbraided and her cheeks flushed from adrenaline. But tonight she's chasing something more vital than sleep. She's chasing a breath of freedom. The servants' secret lives. They're never listed in household ledgers. You won't find them in inventories or recipes or bell schedules. But they exist. Moments stolen between shifts, carved into the corners of impossible days. Because even the most obedient servant has a life beyond the polish and starch. And sometimes they live it under moonlight. The tweenie is headed to the mews, the cluster of stables and outbuildings behind the house, where the coachman keeps his lantern lit long after curfew. He's promised music tonight, soft and off-key, a harmonica rescued from a pawn shop, tuned by ear, and played only after the master has had his nightcap and all the bells have gone quiet. She slips through the scullery door and into the cool night. The coachman is there, leaning against the stable wall, harmonica pressed to his lips. The sound is tinny but soothing, a lullaby for people who never had lullabies. The kitchen maid is already sitting on an overturned bucket, eyes closed, swaying slightly. The tweenie joins her wordlessly. Here, beneath the moon and the scent of horses, the world softens. They become human again. They smile. They talk. They even laugh. These midnight meetings aren't sanctioned. If discovered, they could be dismissed. But they happen anyway, because repression breeds rebellion. And in the tightly wound world of service, rebellion often looks like a stolen song. Not all secret lives are musical. Some servants read. In strict households, reading materials were heavily monitored. Servants weren't meant to engage with ideas, but that never stopped them. Newspapers left behind by the master were smuggled under aprons. Tattered novels passed from hand to hand. One housemaid kept a hidden stash of poetry inside the broom cupboard, pages torn from books found in the rubbish bin. Her favourite was a sonnet about a blackbird. The tweenie once borrowed a copy of The Mysteries of Udolpho, hidden in a potato sack.
She read it in gulps, eyes wide, every line a rebellion. And some wrote, letters mostly, long-winded, misspelled, heartfelt letters to brothers in the army, to mothers in the countryside, to friends they'd never see again. These letters were never stamped. They couldn't afford postage, but writing them mattered. It kept the soul intact. There's a lesser-known phenomenon among Victorian servants, Sunday notebooks. Some kept personal journals on scraps of butcher's paper, recording grievances, hopes, even recipes. One such notebook, found in the wall of a demolished townhouse in Bath, included lists like things I'll never say aloud and how to boil a pig's ear without crying. It was dated 1849. Even more daring were those who escaped, if only for an hour. Servants weren't supposed to leave the premises outside of their designated time off. But rules bend in the dark. Some snuck out for a pint of bitter at a backstreet pub. Others went to the music hall, standing in the back row, letting the rowdy songs and ruder jokes wash over them like freedom. The tweeny dreams of the music hall. She's never been, but the footman once described it. Loud, bright, a blur of sequins and smoke. Women who sang in public, men who wore rouge and told jokes about bishops. It sounds like another planet. She's determined to go, someday. When she has shoes that don't blister, when she has coins that don't jingle with guilt. Romance also blooms in secret. We've seen it already, the glances, the brushes of fingertips, the notes slipped between folded linens. But the full bloom? That happens after hours. A stolen kiss behind the coal shed, a late-night tryst in the laundry room, a promise exchanged under the moon, foolish and fragile, and so beautiful it hurts. These moments are risky. If caught, the consequences are severe, but love and lust don't care about rotors. One maid, now gone, once left a heart scratched into the underside of the staircase. No initials, just a heart. The tweenie found it while scrubbing. She traced it with her finger and smiled, a ghost of someone else's rebellion. Then there are the secret rituals. The coachman, who marks each new moon with a toast to his dead brother. The scullery maid, who tosses salt over her shoulder every time she sees the master's reflection in a mirror. The butler, who always taps the cellar door 3 times before opening it. Superstition, you might say. But in a world with so little control, these rituals are anchors. They make the chaos manageable. Even birthdays, if remembered, are marked quietly. A boiled sweet hidden in a coat pocket, a flower left on a pillow, a note in chalk on the laundry slate. You made it another year. Some homes were stricter than others. Some locked the servants in at night. Others allowed a bit of flexibility, but with constant surveillance. The worst were the homes that pretended to be kind while tightening the leash behind smiles. Yet even in the strictest houses, secret lives thrived. One fringe practice? Moonlight sewing circles. A few maids would gather after hours to mend their own clothes, not the family's. It was technically against the rules, but tolerated if quiet. Sometimes they sewed pockets into their petticoats, hidden pockets, for coins, for letters, for hope. The tweenie has one of these pockets. It holds 2 buttons, a folded recipe, and a penny that was meant for church but never made it there. As dawn creeps in, she slips back inside. She moves quietly, barefoot, across the flagstones, heart still humming from the harmonica. She climbs the back stairs, each creak memorized. She reaches her cot just as the first bell rings. 5 minutes of sleep, maybe. She doesn't mind. For 1 hour she lived. Historians still debate how much of this inner world existed. Diaries are rare, letters are filtered. But every servant who ever passed a note, or hummed a forbidden song, or whispered a joke when the door was closed, they knew. They weren't machines. They weren't shadows. They were people, stitched together with sweat and stubborn joy. And no matter how tightly the household pressed down, they found ways to rise. The bell rings. It's sharp, metallic. More jarring than the town clock's chime. More urgent than a baby's cry. It rings again and the tweenie startles upright, spoon clattering to the floor.
She was halfway through her soup. Not that it matters now, the bell has rung. The kitchen maid sighs. East bedroom, she mutters, already standing. But the tweenie is closer. She's younger, faster, more expendable. She dashes from the table, apron fluttering, feet barely skimming the floor, as she takes the back stairs 2 at a time. In Victorian England, bells were gospel. When the bell rings, you obey, whether it's midnight or mealtime, whether you're kneeling in prayer or soaking a blistered foot, it doesn't matter. The bell is the voice of the house, and it never says please. It's a system that defines the servant experience as much as coal or corsets. Nearly every grand household installed a bellboard, a panel hung in the servants' hall, studded with rows of brass bells, each tied to a particular room.
They're labelled in neat cursive: drawing room, study, nursery, blue bedroom. Behind each is a length of taut wire or cord that stretches invisibly through the walls and ceilings, connecting every room in the house to the silent underworld below. Some bellboards are basic, just bells. Others have indicators, tiny flags that wiggle when rung. And the really sophisticated ones? They reset automatically. So a single tug from upstairs sets a bell singing and a needle spinning toward the offending room. This isn't convenience. This is command. And command must be obeyed. The tweenie reaches the east bedroom, breathing hard, and smooths her apron before knocking once, softly. A clipped "enter" calls from inside. It's the lady's sister visiting again. She spilled cold cream on her dressing gown and would like a fresh one. Immediately, please. The tweenie fetches it from the linen cupboard and lays it gently across the bed. Do try to knock faster next time, the woman said.
It's not as though you're asleep. No, she's not asleep, not ever, really. She curtsies, exits, and hurries back to the scullery. Her soup is gone, cold, or eaten by the cat. She doesn't ask which. This is normal. Interruptions are part of the job. In fact, they are the job. A servant in Victorian England is never off duty.
Are you mind waiting 5 stairs? There's only the bell, and the race to reach it before someone else does, or worse.
Before someone notices you didn't. There's a peculiar art to it. Listening always, but not obviously. You can't hover, that looks idle. But you can't stray too far either. You need to be near enough to act, but not so near you seem to be loitering. It teaches a certain kind of alertness, a sixth sense. The cook says she can tell which bell will ring next based on footstep patterns. The butler insists he can hear the difference between a summon ring and a frustrated ring. The tweenie just listens hard and prays.
There's an old superstition among the staff. Never talk about the bell when it's quiet. It'll ring within the minute. So they don't. Even at night. Especially at night. Because yes, the bells ring in the dark too. The master, drunk and hungry, rings at 1:30 a.m. for toast, not even buttered, just warm and sliced precisely. The lady rings at 2 o'clock for a sleeping draught, then again at 2:15 to say she no longer needs it. Children ring for the chamber pot. Guests ring because they forget where the matches are. And sometimes, strangest of all, bells ring for no reason. The tweenie hears it once, clear as a whistle, library. She rushes there, the fire is lit, the room empty, the gaslights dark. No one's been in the room for hours. She checks twice, then reports back. Likely a faulty wire, the butler says, but his face is pale. One footman whispers later, it's the ghost. The old governess who fell from the nursery balcony. Whether true or not, the bell rang. That's all that matters. Some servants sleep in their clothes for this reason, ready to rise at the clang of metal. Others develop a peculiar half-sleep, one ear always open. The tweenie has learned to dream in fragments, always waiting for the sound that will call her back to the floor. Historians estimate that large households could have up to 40 separate bells, and each one meant something. Some families created coded rings, 1 pull for tea, 2 for a dressing gown, 3 for immediate attention. Heaven help the servant who misunderstood.
One fringe story from a country estate involves a guest who, annoyed with the lateness of dinner, yanked the bell cord hard enough to break the wire. A footman arrived to find the entire parlour bellboard swinging like a carnival ride. The guest was given the best slice of roast. The footman was reprimanded for not arriving faster. In some houses, the bells were too efficient. Servants couldn't reach the room before the guest grew impatient.
So the butler devised a schedule. Certain maids assigned to patrol nearby corridors at peak hours, like soldiers on watch. Always circling. Always listening. Some guests even bragged about how many times they rang in a day. The bell is more than a tool. It's a symbol. It says, I am here, and you are not. I call. You come. The tweenie once hears the lady laugh, saying, Isn't it marvellous to summon a girl with a flick of the finger? Marvellous, yes, unless you're the girl. The power imbalance is woven into every clang. It reminds the servants who matters, who decides, who rings and who runs. Even when it doesn't ring, it rings, in their heads. They anticipate it, flinch when it doesn't come, feel lost in its silence. It becomes the metronome of their existence. Time isn't marked in hours, but in summons. When the bell rings, the house has noticed you, and in this world, being noticed is rarely good. It means the master needs a fresh collar. The lady wants someone to warm her gloves. A guest has dropped their napkin and would like it replaced, even though it landed on a perfectly clean rug. None of it is life-threatening. All of it is urgent. There's no concept of, I'm in the middle of something. The bell overrides all. You leave the laundry, you pause the scouring, you let your tea go cold. Because the moment you think, I'll answer it later, you've forgotten who you are. You are the answerer. The tweenie drifts off that night on the edge of sleep, her ears still straining. In her dream, she's running not toward freedom, but toward the ringing. She reaches the bellboard. All the bells are lit, and she is alone. Zappoli garlands hang lopsided over the front stair rail. The kitchen smells of burnt sugar and wet wool. Somewhere upstairs, the pianoforte is playing an off-key version of God Rest You Merry Gentlemen. It is Christmas in the big house, and no one downstairs is merry. Christmas, in the world of Victorian servants, isn't a holiday, it's an avalanche. The tweenie knows this now. It's her first winter in service, and she'd clung to the whispers of seasonal magic. That perhaps, on Christmas, servants feasted, that perhaps there were gifts, music, maybe even a break from scrubbing. But those whispers were spun from novels and market gossip. The truth is heavy with roast grease and crushed pine needles. Because while the family upstairs celebrates, the servants below bend, stretch, and sprint to make the celebration possible. Today, the tweenie rises earlier than usual, before even the footman. It's barely 4 o'clock and still pitch dark outside, her breath puffing white in the scullery as she fumbles with frozen coal. The fire must be lit before the drawing room is decked, and the drawing room must be decked before the lady descends, and the lady must descend before anyone dares sip so much as a spoonful of broth. There's a myth, persistent, cozy, that Victorian servants were lavished with gifts and goodwill at Christmas time. And there is some truth in it. Some households held Christmas dinners for the staff or handed out boxes on Boxing Day, little packages of coin, leftover sweets or last year's gloves. But such generosity was rare and always filtered through the lens of hierarchy. Whatever kindness was offered came not from equality, but from magnanimity. And it came after the servants had endured days of unrelenting labour. Today alone, the tweenie helps polish silver, pluck the feathers from 4 geese, strip and redress 2 bedrooms for guests, deliver tea trays to the parlour, and decorate the banisters with pine boughs so fresh they drip sap onto her cuffs. She also slips twice on the icy back steps, bruises her knee, and gets scolded by the butler for squinting too much. The Christmas table, by mid-morning, is already heaving with luxury. Plum puddings soaked in brandy, roasted partridges with glazed chestnuts, mincemeat tarts, blood oranges imported from Spain, and a towering cake so heavy it has to be carried in by 2 footmen. The tweenie sees none of it, except what passes through her hands on its way to the master's table. She hears the laughter upstairs, the popping of crackers, the occasional cheer as a joke is read aloud. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the cook is shouting orders, and the kitchen maid is crying into a bowl of parsnip mash, because she burned the custard and now fears the lady will have her boxed and gone before New Year. One mainstream fact: Christmas in Victorian England was growing increasingly elaborate during this era, thanks to Queen Victoria's own traditions and the influence of Prince Albert. Trees became fashionable, carols were revived, and gift-giving, once modest, began to swell into the extravaganza we recognize today. But behind every glittering ornament and perfectly roasted turkey was a servant who hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. In some households, servants weren't even allowed to attend church on Christmas morning, not if they were guests. God can wait, the butler said once, the roast can't. Still, traditions persist. Some families do give their servants small gifts: an orange, a shilling, perhaps a muffler or a pair of mittens, usually knitted by the mistress with more piety than skill. The tweenie receives a handkerchief with a lace corner. It's the only present she'll get this year. She treasures it anyway. In the servants' hall, there's a brief moment of calm. After the luncheon is cleared and before the formal supper begins, the staff sit down to their own dinner. It's simple: cold meats, pickles, leftover plum pudding reheated with a touch of extra rum. The cook carves the goose, the butler pours the wine, an older vintage nearly turned, and for a few minutes the air feels not light exactly, but softer. Someone sings. A footman offers a terrible joke about mistletoe and a clergyman. Even the housekeeper cracks a smile. The tweenie laughs until her stomach hurts, perhaps from hunger, perhaps from joy. This moment, brief as it is, feels like rebellion, because Christmas to the family upstairs is a spectacle, but to the servants, it's endurance. There's a curious fringe custom found in a few northern households: a servant's pantomime. After dinner, the staff would gather in the laundry room, don scraps of costume and perform for each other. Farces, skits and songs poking fun at the very people they served. Of course, these were secret performances. If discovered, they risk being dismissed for disrespect. But for an hour or two, they reclaimed laughter. The tweenie has heard of this tradition from the laundry maid.
"We did it once at my last place," she says with a grin. "I played the mistress with a stick up my back and a bowl on my head." The tweenie giggles. "Did she know?" "She never knew, but I think the butler did. He laughed harder than anyone. There's something rebellious about joy when it's not allowed. And joy, in this house, is rationed." By nightfall, the tweenie is so tired, her arms barely respond to thought. She carries the brandy butter to the parlour on instinct alone, head buzzing, legs numb. The guests are singing carols now, off-key and full of port. One asks her name. She blinks, unsure if it's a joke. The lady says, "Oh, don't trouble her. They don't really like being spoken to." And just like that, she's invisible again. After midnight, the tweenie helps with the final clear-up. Dozens of glasses smeared with lipstick and fingerprints, crumbs of pudding in the rug, candle wax hardened on the table linen. The fire is dying, the laughter has faded. Upstairs, the family sleeps off their celebration. Downstairs, the tweenie crawls into her cot, too exhausted to change clothes. She clutches the lace-cornered handkerchief in her fist. It smells faintly of lavender and starch. Maybe it's the nicest thing she's ever owned. Maybe, despite everything, this was a good Christmas. Maybe. Historians still argue whether the Victorian notion of servant loyalty was genuine or imposed. Did servants love their families, or were they simply afraid? Did they feel part of something greater, or just trapped by circumstance? The answer, like most truths, is both. The tweenie wakes the next morning, sore, cold, and 20 minutes late. She stumbles toward the scullery, heart sinking. But on the table, someone has left a wedge of cake and a folded note. "For the girl who lights the fires, thank you." No name, just warmth.
It's not freedom, but it's something. Collaborators isn't know it's coming. The tweenie wakes before the bell, as usual. Touch the cold stone. Her hands reach instinctively for the stiff apron hung on the hook beside her cot. She ties it tightly. A ritual now. One knot behind the back, one tug at the waist. It's a Thursday. She polishes boots, gathers coal, kneels to reset the dining room fire. She's halfway through scrubbing the kitchen sink when the housekeeper calls her name from the pantry, just once. Calm, sharp, like a teacup cracked down the middle. Everything stops. When a servant's name is called like that, once, without emotion, it doesn't bode well. She wipes her hands on her apron and steps in. The housekeeper doesn't look angry. She doesn't even look up. There was a scuff on the stair carpet, she says quietly. The lady noticed. The tweenie blinks. She remembers brushing that stair, twice even. I saw nothing, ma'am. The housekeeper still doesn't meet her eyes. She wants you gone. There's a moment, slow and stupid, the kind where time stretches into elastic. Gone, but she did everything. She lit the fires, she folded the linen, she even stayed late to scrub the copper pots without being asked. What scuff? What scuff? It doesn't matter. That's the first rule. You can be dismissed for anything or for nothing at all. Fired for breathing wrong. In Victorian England, a servant's position was as fragile as a porcelain saucer. You could be let go for tardiness, for clumsiness, for speaking out of turn, for ill health, for gossip, for being liked too much or too little. You didn't need to break a rule. You just needed to displease. And sometimes, even that wasn't necessary. Some mistresses dismissed girls to keep the staff sharp, a sort of seasonal culling, to remind the rest not to slack. Others did it for the feeling of power, because someone spilled tea on a doily or used too much starch on a sleeve cuff. Dismissal wasn't just about losing a job. It was about losing everything. Your room, your meals, your community, your reference. And without a reference, you were no one. A reference was a servant's currency. It was a signed note from the housekeeper, or better yet, the lady, vouching that you were punctual, clean, obedient, moral. Without it, no other house would touch you. I'm sorry, the housekeeper says now, finally looking at her. She won't give a letter. The tweenie stands there, cold and suddenly small. But I haven't done anything. The housekeeper's silence is an answer. She packs her things, what few things she owns, in silence. A comb, the lace-trimmed handkerchief, a thimble, the recipe she never used. No one says goodbye. Not because they don't care, but because they're terrified it could be them tomorrow. Dismissal in Victorian service was like plague. It moved through rumum, then descended without warning. One day, you were polishing silver. The next, you were on the street. One mainstream historical fact, servants in England had no legal protections from wrongful termination. There were no tribunals, no recourse. If your employer claimed you were unfit, you were unfit. End of story. And if they claimed you were immoral, well, that was worse. A moral stain on your record meant permanent exclusion from respectable households. One suggestion of theft, gossip, flirtation, or impropriety could close every door in town. And the worst part, it didn't even need to be true. Historians still debate how often references were honest. Some argue they were mostly accurate, while others suggest they were tools of control, used to reward obedience and punish rebellion. Certainly, the lack of standardization meant references varied wildly. One lady might call a girl insufficiently refined, while another would call her reliable if rustic. Those words could mean the difference between a new position and starvation. Servants had to learn to read between the lines. A willing worker meant unskilled, of sweet temperament often implied stupidity, left of her own accord, was code for we made her leave quietly. The tweenie has no reference, no story to soften the blow. Just the scuff on the stair or the suggestion of one. The housekeeper gives her a coin, sixpence, enough for bread. Maybe a lodging house, for one night. You did well for a time, she says. It's meant kindly, it hurts, anyway. The tweenie steps out the side door with her bundle in hand. The world is loud outside, carriages, dogs, children shouting. She hasn't heard this kind of noise in weeks. She doesn't know where to go. She walks. Through alleys, past markets, past houses that look just like the one she left. Grand, glittering, cold. It starts to rain. She finds a bench under an awning and sits, the bundle clutched to her chest. She doesn't cry. Not yet. She remembers a scullery maid once saying, "Best not to cry where they can see. They might think you're begging."
Number 1 fringe anecdote, strange, but possibly true. Describes a housemaid who, after being dismissed for laughing too loudly, became a stage actress. She wore her old uniform in a comedy revue and earned cheers from men who once ignored her tray. Whether she laughed or wept behind the curtain is another matter. Most dismissed servants weren't so lucky. They became laundresses, charwomen, flower girls. They slept in poorhouses. They went hungry. Some turned to theft, some to worse. The tweenie doesn't know what she'll do yet. She just sits and waits for something, anything, to feel real. The great cruelty of dismissal is not just that it happens, it's that it erases you. You vanish from the ledger, from the duty schedule, from the memory of the household. Your cot is filled by another girl before the week ends. Your apron is washed, pressed, passed along. You're not missed. You're replaced. And yet sometimes the house remembers. The cook glances at the scullery one morning, and her hand lingers on a clean plate. The footman passes the stairs and pauses, remembering a girl who always scrubbed the corner with extra care. Even the housekeeper, stern and practical, catches herself writing the tweenie's name on the roster before scratching it out. These are not grand griefs. They are quiet ones. But they are real. The tweenie sleeps rough that night, curled under a staircase, clutching her handkerchief like a talisman. Tomorrow, she'll try the agency. Try to explain why she left without a letter. Try not to look too desperate. She tells herself she'll find work again, somewhere, somehow. She's done it before. She can do it again. Still, as she drifts into uneasy sleep, one thought keeps circling. I was fired for a scuff. But what she really means is, I was fired for being seen. He finds the new place by accident. It's smaller than the last house. Only 3 stories with ivy choking the front, and shutters that creak when the wind hits right. The agency woman wrinkled her nose when offering the post. Understaffed, she'd said. No footman, no cook, and the butler's half blind. But they need someone fast, and you're still quick on your feet, I suppose. That's how she begins again. As kitchen maid, this time. Not quite as low as a tweenie, though her knees still bruise the same on flagstone floors. The lady of the house, widowed, pious, and fond of hymn humming, insists on perfect linen and dry toast at breakfast. The master is a clergyman, more tolerant perhaps, but he avoids her eyes. And the hours? They're as long as ever. But now she's old enough to notice how the work wears on people. She watches the housekeeper, once a nursemaid, now hunched and stiff, struggle to climb stairs. The laundress's hands are curled from arthritis. The coal boy has a cough that never goes. Still, some rise. The long climb, if you're lucky. Not every servant stays in the scullery.
The tweenie, now a maid, is learning how the system both smothers and promotes.
The tweenie, now a maid, is learning how the system both smothers and promotes. You can move up in rank, yes, but the climb is steep, slow, and paved with silence. To rise, you must become indispensable.
To become indispensable, you must first become invisible in all the right ways.
She begins by watching the cook, this new one, a middle-aged widow with flour in her hair and hands like folded dough. The cook notices, gives her scraps, then tasks, then prays once.
You've got fingers that know a knife's edge.
She says, nodding as the girl slices turnips with barely a glance.
Don't waste them on dishwater.
The girl glows for the first time in weeks. Soon, she's helping with the puddings, then entrusted with sauces, then left alone with the game pie on Sunday morning. It's a test. The mistress pronounces it passable.
The cook doesn't smile, but she says, "Next week, you try the roast." It's working. Not because the household is kind, but because the girl is learning to make herself useful. Promotion in Victorian service is like climbing a rotted ladder. Every rung is suspect, and there's always someone ready to step over your fingers. But the rewards, small as they are, matter. More sleep, better meals, fewer bruises, and most precious of all, a locked drawer of your own. When she's promoted to undercook, she receives a key. It opens a drawer in the kitchen dresser where she can keep her own apron, her own soap, even a scrap of ribbon. That drawer feels like a kingdom. She begins to plan. A year from now, she'll apply for a full cook position in a house with more staff. Then maybe, in 5 or 6 years, she could manage a household kitchen, maybe with assistants of her own, maybe her own small room, with a real window, maybe a pantry to inventory. Some servants do it. They climb. There are famous examples. One parlourmaid became head housekeeper at a baron's estate. One stable boy became valet to a duke. One girl, just a scullery maid at first, became a lady's companion and later married a widowed clerk who had his own shop. Historians often cite these stories to argue that service offered opportunity, that it was a meritocracy of sorts. But for every tale of upward mobility, there are 100 of stagnation, of servants who worked 20 years and died without a pension, of maids who rose only to fall back when they grew old, slow, or sick. The climb existed, but it was slick with expectation, gendered rules, and unspoken ceilings. Male servants rose differently. A footman, if tall and clever, could become a valet, personal attendant to the master. Valets had privileges, access to clothes, travel, and even conversation. They might follow a master abroad, attend lectures, learn languages. Women, they rose more slowly. A scullery maid might become a kitchen maid, then cook, but only if the current cook retired or died. A housemaid could, over decades, become a lady's maid. That role brought perks, better clothes, lighter work, and sometimes a bond with the mistress. But it also brought isolation, being part of neither upstairs nor downstairs. Our girl, now nearing 17, has her eyes set on the kitchen. She practices recipes in her head at night, murmuring spices like prayers. She dreams in dough and broth. She copies lines from the cook's old notebook when no one is looking. She sharpens her knives when she can. But ambition is dangerous too. In a household like this, if you climb too fast, others notice. The housemaid has already begun calling her Madam Saucepot. The laundress mutters that fancy fingers don't last long. The cook sees it, pulls her aside. "Don't make noise about wanting more," she says. "Just work. The house will notice, or it won't." But the more you chase it, the faster it runs. And then, after a long pause, "But you've got the hands for it. Keep your head down and your knives sharp." The girl nods. She understands. The climb is possible, yes, but it costs. It costs time, energy, dignity, friendships. Sometimes, to rise, you must stay quiet while others fall. One housemaid is dismissed for rudeness after answering a guest's question too directly. The girl says nothing. She just takes over the maid's breakfast rota, and she does it perfectly. There's guilt. Of course there is. But guilt doesn't pay for soap. Another fringe fact: some households kept internal rankings written in code, visible only to the butler or housekeeper. A numerical value beside each name, marking their reliability, appearance, and loyalty. The girl suspects such a list exists here. She imagines herself rising on it, point by point, like mercury in a barometer. The goal isn't status, it's survival. Because to grow old in service is to risk becoming a ghost. The housekeeper hobbles more each week now. She coughs behind her hand. The master barely notices. The lady mutters that her handkerchiefs come back creased. There are no pensions in service, no retirement plans. When you can't work, you're sent away. Maybe with a coin, maybe not. And so, the girl sharpens her skill like a weapon. She learns 3 ways to preserve a pigeon. She learns to fold napkins into fans. She learns which plates chip easily and which sauces hide oversalted meat. She becomes, in her own quiet way, indispensable. But still, she knows she'll never sit at the table. She'll never ring the bell. She will always be the answer, never the question. Still, she climbs. And climbing, even in shadows, is better than standing still. She's 34 now, or maybe 36. She's never been entirely sure. Birthdays weren't something they counted in the parish home, and her first position as a tweenie began when her hair was still in braids and her legs had barely outgrown the hem of her borrowed apron. But now, standing in the kitchen of a respectable house, just outside London, she wears a starched white collar and a spotless apron with her name embroidered, faintly, on the inside hem. Mrs. Holloway, the laundry tag reads, although she's never married. It was added to lend her credibility when she was hired as cook. That was 6 years ago. She oversees 2 maids now, neither of them particularly sharp. But she trains them patiently, corrects their grip on the knives, shows them the trick to crisping a roast without drying it. She speaks gently when she can, and firmly when she must. She knows how the wrong tone can break a girl. She was broken once herself. But she's here now, and sometimes, when she stands at the larder door and surveys her domain, the butcher's list pinned beside the sugar weights, the lined-up preserves, the yeast rising just as it should, she feels the quiet satisfaction of someone who survived. Still, in the mirror above the pantry sink, she catches sight of her own eyes. There's tiredness there. Not exhaustion, no, not anymore, but a kind of weariness that's etched into the bone, vanishing into the wallpaper. That's what it is to grow old in service. Not fall, not fail, just fade. It happens slowly. The hands stiffen, the hearing dims, the memory starts to slip. Not dramatically, just enough to forget where you left the sugar tongs or whether you salted the second batch of stock. The younger staff begin to ask if you need help lifting the pot. And the mistress begins to say, in that clipped, pitying way, "She's been with us such a long time, hasn't she?" As if you're a family heirloom, tarnished, sentimental, not quite useful anymore, but difficult to throw away. The cook before her, Miss Branson, worked until her eyes failed. Then her ankles. Then, one day, she burned the custard and forgot it entirely. She was asked to rest. Sent away with a wool blanket and a packet of tea. No pension, no savings, just 40 years of recipes memorized, and no kitchen left to use them. No one knows where she went. There's no union, no safety net, no home for former servants other than the almshouse or the workhouse, or, if they're fortunate, a niece willing to share her bread. One mainstream fact: it wasn't until well into the 20th century that domestic workers in Britain were formally included in labour protections. In the 1800s, they had no guaranteed rights, no minimum wage, no severance. Once you were too slow to scrub, You simply stopped existing. They don't say it aloud, of course. No one says, "She's old." They say things like, "set in her ways," or "a bit behind the time." A younger cook is brought in for Sunday dinner. "Just to help," they say. You smile, you nod, you tell yourself this is fine. You knew this would come. One of the maids asks her softly, "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" "Being new, starting out." She laughs. "I don't miss chilblains and burned fingers, no." But later, alone, she thinks of the firelight in that first big house, of stolen harmonica tunes and the hush of midnight gossip in the scullery, of the taste of jam from the lady's breakfast tray, swiped on a fingertip in the moment no one was looking. She remembers her first kiss behind the coal chute, the soft knock of bell wires at night, the thrill of being needed, even if not loved. Now the bells still ring, but for others. Her name is written in chalk, and then it's not. Her tasks shrink. The mistress wants fresh eyes, someone with new energy. There's a girl apprenticing now, a cousin's daughter. Polite, bright, careless. The sugar burns. The eggs curdle. But she's young. And youth forgives itself. She finds herself repeating stories to no one in particular. She lingers in the pantry longer than she should. She starts to forget the names of dishes she used to make in her sleep. One Sunday morning she cuts herself while boning a fish. Not badly, but she can't stop the bleeding. She hides it, wraps it, works on. But the mistress sees the blood on the towel and frowns. A week later, the butler asks her, over tea, if she's ever considered retiring to the country. They know of a small cottage, spare, quiet, unfurnished. She nods, smiles, says thank you, then returns to the kitchen and finishes icing the cake. One fringe anecdote, found in a letter from a late 1800s housekeeper, describes a retired cook who took to making pies for funerals, selling them for pennies from a barrow in Whitechapel. The letter ends with, she said she preferred feeding the grieving, at least they were too sad to complain. It's funny and true. The last day comes without fanfare. She packs her trunk. Not much inside. A folded apron, a tin of clove, a cracked recipe book with years of grease spots and love. The younger cook, new now, smiles brightly and asks for her plum pudding trick. She tells her. She even writes it down. Then she leaves. No one stops her. No one rings. She walks slowly, coat buttoned, bag in hand. She finds a boarding room not far from the old market. It's quiet, cold, but hers. She boils tea in the morning, watches the pigeons. Sometimes she talks to them. She walks to church on Sundays, helps a neighbour's child learn to mend. Sometimes she reads the papers and wonders if anyone from the house ever sees her name in the retired column. They don't. They never did. But still, every so often, she dreams of bells. And in those dreams, she answers them. Not because she must, but because it means she's still part of something. Not vanished, not erased. Just a quiet echo in a grand old house. The streets are quiet now. The gas lights flicker soft against brick and cobble. The last of the footsteps have faded, and the bells, those endless, insistent bells, have finally fallen silent. Our servant girl is no longer a girl. Her apron hangs in the wardrobe. Her shoes are worn soft at the toes. And though the fires no longer call for her hands, the memory of their warmth lingers. She breathes slower now, sleeps deeper, dreams, still, of linen drying in sunlit courtyards and the smell of sweet puddings from a warm oven. She remembers the hum of footsteps overhead, the rush of water in copper pots, the scratch of the broom on oak, all the sounds that meant life.
Even the silence that came after, the long, settled hush of old age, is gentle now. So, as you lie there, eyes heavy and still, let your thoughts drift with hers. Drift down long hallways with creaking floorboards, down to the servants' hall, dim and warm, to a kitchen with bread rising slowly under a tea towel.
Cot beneath the back stairs, where dreams are small but real. There's peace here, in the stillness, in the work done and dusted, in the stories once whispered, now remembered. No more bells, no more boots to polish, just rest. Rest, dear listener. Sleep as soundly as a maid with no duties at dawn. And if you dream of a staircase, freshly scrubbed and gleaming in candlelight, well, now you know whose hands made it shine.